Have you ever tried making a sourdough starter and felt like a failure when it still looked flat after a week? When the instructions you were following said your starter should be ready? Here's the thing, you didn't do anything wrong. 7 or 10 days is often not enough time for a new starter to get going, and to make things worse, if you follow a rigid feeding schedule like most tutorials have you do, you can actually weaken your starter instead of making it stronger. I've been baking sourdough for a few years now, and after plenty of early failures, I developed this foolproof method for making a starter from scratch. It's based on observing and responding to what your particular starter is doing. I break the process up into 3 phases based on what your starter needs at each stage of its development. I'll show you how to tell when it's ready to discard and feed so it gets stronger every day, and how to tell when it's ready to move on to the next phase. For full and detailed step-by-step instructions, care tips, and troubleshooting, head over to my blog. Links are in the description. Let's get started. Phase 1 is all about establishing your starter and giving wild yeasts the best chance to grow. Using rye or whole wheat flour is key here. They have more enzymes and nutrients that wild yeasts thrive on. Start with a clean jar. Glass or food-safe plastic will work fine. Weigh 50 grams of rye or whole wheat flour into the jar. Using a scale is the easiest and most accurate, but if you prefer cups, my blog has both measurements. Don't worry if you're off by a few grams. Being reasonably close to the measurement is good enough. Next, add 50 grams of water. Filtered water is ideal, but tap water works too. If your tap water is chlorinated, you need to either leave it out uncovered for 24 hours or boil it for 15 minutes and let it cool to room temperature so the natural yeasts can thrive. Stir everything together, scrape down the sides, and loosely screw on the lid so gases can escape. Leave your starter at room temperature for at least 24 and up to 48 hours. It's day 2 and my starter doesn't really look different. Your starter might not look or smell like much yet, or you might notice a grassy or slightly pungent smell, maybe even a few tiny bubbles, or none at all. All of this is completely normal. Feed it with 50 grams of rye or whole wheat flour and 50 grams of water, then stir to combine. Use an elastic band to mark the starter's level so you can easily see how much it rises. Loosely replace the lid and let it sit at room temperature for at least another 24 hours, or a bit longer if your kitchen is cool. It's day 3 and my starter still doesn't look like much is happening, though it's starting to smell a little gross, which is normal at this stage. 50 grams of the starter is going into a clean jar, along with 50 grams of rye or whole wheat flour and 50 grams of water. Stir, mark with an elastic, loosely screw on the lid, and leave for another 24 hours or so. Until it's ready for baking, which won't be for a while, the rest of the starter needs to go in the garbage. Dump the remaining starter and wipe the jar out with a paper towel before washing it. You want to avoid letting too much starter go down the drain, or you could end up with an expensive plumbing problem. On day 4, my starter almost doubled and had lots of little bubbles, and it smelled even worse than it did yesterday. This is called the false rise. It happens when the bad bacteria in the flour flare up and produce gas, making the starter rise. Even though it looks active, it's not safe to bake with yet. The false rise usually shows up around days 2 to 4, and this is the sign that your starter is ready to move into phase 2. In phase 2, the goal is to feed only when you see some activity, like small bubbles on the top or sides, before you discard and feed. That way, you're always feeding at a peak, which strengthens the starter instead of weakening it. Don't worry if it takes more than 24 hours for activity to show up at this stage. This is also when you can start transitioning to using unbleached all-purpose flour if you want to. I like to make the switch because it's cheaper and gives the starter a more neutral flavor, but you can use rye or whole wheat forever if you want to. For today's feed, I'm putting 50 grams of starter into a clean jar, then adding 25 grams of rye or whole wheat, 25 grams of unbleached all-purpose flour, and 50 grams of water. Stir, mark the level with an elastic band, loosely screw on the lid, and let it sit at room temp for about 24 hours. On day 5, my starter didn't rise much, but it did rise a little, and I see some bubbles on the side, so it's ready to be fed. This time I'm using a little less rye and a little more all-purpose flour. Put 50 grams of starter into a clean jar, 50 grams of water, 40 grams of all-purpose flour, and 10 grams of rye or whole wheat. As always, stir, mark with an elastic, loosely screw the lid on, and leave at room temp for about 24 hours. From day 6 to 15, my starter really didn't do much, just a small rise and some bubbles each day. This is where a lot of people think they failed, but it's actually completely normal for starters to seem almost dormant at this phase. What's happening is the wild yeasts and good bacteria are slowly building up and outcompeting the bad bacteria. At the same time, they're lowering the pH, in other words, making the mixture more acidic, so it becomes inhospitable to unfriendly microbes. This shift takes time, anywhere from a few days to more than a week. For now, stick with the same routine. 50 grams of starter goes into a clean jar, along with 10 grams of rye or whole wheat flour, 40 grams of all-purpose, and 50 grams of water. Stir, mark with an elastic, cover loosely, and leave at room temp for about 24 hours or until you see some activity. It's day 16 and my starter almost doubled. It's definitely the biggest rise I've seen so far, which is a really good sign that the wild yeasts are finally starting to take hold. Once your starter can double, or at least come close, within 24 hours of a feeding, that's when you can move into phase 3. You'll keep less starter in the jar and discard more. The idea is to give a small amount of wild yeasts a lot of fresh food to really encourage the population to grow. For today's feeding, I'm taking only 10 grams of starter or so, basically a small scoop on the end of a spatula, into a clean jar, then adding 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour. You know the drill. Stir, mark, cover, and leave it at room temp. I kept feeding my starter the same way for the next few days, and by day 21, it was finally ready to bake with. You'll know your starter is ready to use when it reliably doubles within 24 hours of feeding, smells pleasantly sour or fruity, and has none of the nasty smell it had early on. At this point, you can start using it to make bread with, and you can also store it in the fridge to slow fermentation down so you can feed it less often. And just for fun, here's a time lapse of my starter more than tripling overnight after I fed it on day 21. Watching it bubble up like this never gets old. Now that you've got a strong bubbly starter, it's time to put it to work. Try my beginner-friendly artisan sourdough bread. No special tools required, just what you already have in your kitchen. Check out the video and I'll walk you through it step by step. If this video helped you finally get a starter going, or at least gave you the confidence to give it a try, please consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching.